Israel enjoys an immunity that is simply unparalleled. Now the question becomes, how is this possible? In order to answer that question, we really do need to go back to the 1960s when John F. Kennedy was president. Now, President Kennedy was insisting that the American Zionist Council, the precursor to the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee, otherwise known as AIPAC, be registered as a foreign agent. This would have seriously diminished the capacity of this lobby to affect American policy. Kennedy was also insisting that Dimona, Israel's nuclear power plant, be inspected by the United States. Unfortunately, we all know what happened to John F. Kennedy.
Last week, Secretary of State Blinken made his fifth trip to Israel, where this time he urged Prime Minister Netanyahu not to launch a major military operation against Rafah, a city in southern Gaza whose population has increased fivefold since the beginning of the war, because Palestinian refugees fleeing from northern Gaza and other parts of Gaza were told by the Netanyahu government that Rafah was a safe place for them to go. Within hours of meeting with Secretary Blinken, Prime Minister Netanyahu rebuffed that request and announced publicly that he had decided to launch just such an operation against Rafah. And yesterday, as if to rub it in, Prime Minister Netanyahu appeared on ABC Sunday television here in the United States to say that despite the requests from the United States, he had decided that Israel will launch a military operation against the city of Rafah. Madam President, this is part of a pattern where Prime Minister Netanyahu thanks President Biden in the United States for our substantial military assistance, but then mostly rejects our requests to take measures to protect civilians and to facilitate desperately needed humanitarian assistance to people in need. President Biden has called the bombings in Gaza, quote, indiscriminate. And the United States has repeatedly called upon the Netanyahu government to take steps to end the huge number of civilian deaths from bombing, artillery, and other weaponry. The death toll now stands at over 28,000 people, over two-thirds of them women and children. And what does Prime Minister Netanyahu say? He says Israel is already doing all it can. President Biden recently called Israel's actions in Gaza, quote, over the top, unquote. Prime Minister Netanyahu said he didn't know what President Biden was talking about. Every major international aid organization that I've spoken to, and I've spoken to virtually everyone, says that the humanitarian crisis in Gaza is the worst they've seen in the world ever in their decades of experience, as over 400,000 people are on the verge of starvation, and the entire population of over 200 million is at crisis levels of food insecurity. Meanwhile, Israeli authorities in Gaza, Kogat, say there's, quote, there's no humanitarian crisis in Gaza, unquote. The Biden administration has repeatedly urged the Netanyahu government to allow for more humanitarian assistance into Gaza, only to be mostly ignored. The overriding message to the United States from the Netanyahu coalition is this: thanks for giving us all the weapons, thanks for your taxpayer support, but don't lecture us about civilian casualties or the need to better facilitate the delivery of humanitarian assistance.